Share your slides.
Yep. 1 second. How's that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, just so you know, when I go into full screen mode, I can't see any of you. So, if there's something that comes up in the chat, please feel free to let me know.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
Maybe we can start.
What's that?
I'm asking Achilles.
Yes, thank you. So I'm very happy to introduce Samuel Schiavone, MIT, Massachusetts. So he will be presenting about computing a database of Belyi maps. Thank you, Sam. So you can start now.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you to the organizers, especially Devendra, for coordinating my talk. So yes, today I'm going to be talking about our work in computing Belyi maps and organizing them into a database. So the outline of the talk will be as follows. So first, I'll give some background. This will probably repeat some of the material that was covered in previous sessions, specifically in Anand Deoprkar's talk on Belyi's theorem and Claire Bruin's talk on dessin. After that, I'll talk more about our method of computing Belyi maps. So our method is a little bit different from the one that you heard in the previous talk. And I'll even give you a live demo with some of our code in Magma, which, okay, hopefully it will go okay. And finally, I'll present the data that we've computed, both in our Bellydb GitHub repository and available on the website of the L functions and modular forms database, LMFDB. Okay, so let's get started. So you have this natural inclusion of curves over Q bar into curves over C. And if you're a more sort of differential geometric minded person, this latter category, curves over C, so smooth projective curves over C, I should say, is equivalent to the category of compact connected Riemann surfaces. So you can either think about things more analytically in the Riemann surface category or more algebraically in this curve category. So since we have this inclusion, and so these three equivalence signs are all, so these are isomorphisms in the appropriate categories. So you might ask, which curves over C arise as base changes of curves over Q bar? So which ones come from this inclusion of curves over Q bar into curves over C? In other words, which curves over C can be defined over Q bar? And I'll just point out that, so you might think that, oh, you can just look at an equation and if it has transcendental things like pi or e, well then clearly it must not be defined over Q bar. That's not quite true. So this is an example illustrating that. So here's one elliptic curve, y squared equals x cubed minus pi cubed. And you can clearly see that this is defined over Q pi, but pi is transcendental. However, since it's isomorphic to the second elliptic curve, y squared equals x cubed minus 1 via this map given here, then in fact, the isomorphism class containing, containing these curves is also defined over Q. So the minimal field of definition of this, this curve is Q. So I guess really another way to phrase this is, does the isomorphism class of this curve over C contain a curve defined over Q bar? So as Anand mentioned in his talk, Belyi gave a wonderful criterion for when this is the case. So let me just briefly state his theorem again. So a smooth projective curve X over C can be defined over Q bar if and only if there exists a non-constant morphism of algebraic curves phi from X to P1, unramified outside 0, 1, and infinity. And such a map is called a Belyi map. So yeah, this is a very striking theorem because it's basically giving, the first question is kind of arithmetic in nature. You're asking if the curve can be defined using equations that just use algebraic numbers. And the second, this criterion that Belyi gave is much more geometric in nature, right? You're asking for a morphism with certain ramification behavior. All right, so just to restate the definition, so right, it's a map from X to P1 unramified outside 0, 1, and infinity. So here's a very simple example. So consider this map from P1 to P1 given by this polynomial. So I claim that this is a Belyi map. Let's see why this is the case. So if you take the derivative of this polynomial, you can see that the only places where the derivative vanishes are points above 0 and 1. So it vanishes at 0 and -1, which are mapped to 0 and 1 respectively. And okay, it's also ramified, totally ramified above infinity because I'm only showing you an affine piece, but that's okay as well, right? We're allowed ramification above these 3 points. And you can even sort of see what the ramification type is above these points by factoring the polynomial. So if you factor phi, you see you get this factor of x squared, meaning there's a point of ramification index 2 above 0, and then also, you know, a simple point of ramification index 1. And if you factor phi minus 1, again, you get this quadratic factor. So again, you have ramification type 2 and 1. Okay, so here's our first example of a Belyi map. So if you want to visualize this as a branched cover, maybe you'd make a picture that looks something like this. So above 0, you have this point of index 2, and then a simple point, and above 1, you have also this point of index 2. And I haven't drawn the points above infinity, but, or the point, yeah, so all 3 sheets would come together at that point. And it would have ramification index 3. So here's a way to sort of visualize what a Belyi map looks like. All right, so Belyi maps have an interesting relationship with the absolute Galois group of Q. Grothendieck was very impressed by Belyi's theorem, and he said, never without a doubt was such a deep and disconcerting result proved in so few lines. And using Belyi's theorem, Grothendieck described a faithful action of the absolute Galois group of Q on the set of isomorphism classes of Belyi maps. So this is something that I think Claire mentioned in her talk. So our somewhat lofty goal is to understand this group by studying this action. So the absolute Galois group of Q contains every Galois group of a number field as a quotient. I guess I should say it has every number field, Galois group of a number field as a quotient. So it's arguably the most important group in algebraic number theory. So if we understood this group better, we could really say more things about number fields and their Galois groups. So like I said, this is a somewhat lofty goal to try to understand this important and mysterious group. And we're going to try to study its action by writing down explicit equations for Belyi maps, and then looking at how the Galois group acts on these isomorphism classes of Belyi maps. So this will give us a concrete view of the Galois action. Okay, so our method of computation relies on what I like to call the big bijective picture. So there are many different categories, all of which are equivalents. And the relevant players in this big bijective drama are Belyi maps, transitive permutation triples, subgroups of triangle groups, dessin d'enfant, and function field extensions in one variable. So we've defined Belyi maps so far. So let's look at the other characters in this story. Okay, a transitive permutation triple of degree D is a triple of permutations, which will denote sigma, consisting of sigma 0, 1, and infinity. They're permutations on D symbols. And they have to satisfy the following 2 properties. So their product has to be 1, and the subgroup that they generate inside SD has to be a transitive subgroup, meaning that the action on 1 through D is transitive. So we have a notion, just as we have a notion of equivalence for Belyi maps, of an isomorphism of Belyi maps, we have a notion of equivalence for permutation triples. So we say that permutation triples sigma and sigma prime are simultaneously conjugate if there exists another permutation row in SD that conjugates each one of the 3 permutations in sigma to the ones in sigma prime. So that's why we call it simultaneous conjugation, right? You have to use the same row to conjugate all three permutations. And we'll see, so like I said, these categories are all equivalent. So there's a Belyi map corresponding to this transitive permutation triple. And really what all you're doing is you're renumbering the sheets of the cover. So, there are D sheets of a degree D Belyi map, but if you renumber the sheets, you change these permutations by simultaneous conjugation. Okay, so these permutation triples can be organized into passports. So the idea is that we want to find the Galois orbits of Belyi maps, and these passports are Galois invariant, so they must be unions of orbits. Okay, so a passport consists of the data of these three things: a little g, a big G, and a lambda, where little g is a non-negative integer, capital G is a transitive subgroup of the symmetric group on D characters, and lambda is three partitions of D. So corresponding, so we have, well, basically they're the cycle types of the three permutations in the triple. So let me be a little bit more precise about how we're organizing these triples into passports. So a permutation triple sigma belongs to a passport given by these three pieces of data, little g, big G, and lambda, if now there are three conditions to satisfy. So, okay, maybe I'll start with the last one and then go to the top. So as I mentioned, the three partitions are supposed to tell you the cycle types of sigma 0, 1, and infinity. The capital G is the subgroup that these three generate. Okay, and this first one might look a little mysterious, but basically it's a maybe a combinatorial version of Riemann-Hurwitz. So basically what it's saying is that the Belyi map corresponding to this transitive permutation triple is defined on a curve of genus G. And okay, so maybe this, like I said, if you know the Riemann-Hurwitz theorem, this probably looks familiar. You have 2G minus 2, then you have D times, okay, it's a map to P1, which is genus 0. So 2 times 0 minus 2 is minus 2. And then this is basically encoding the multiplicities of the ramification divisor. So like I said, you should really just think that this first condition is saying that the corresponding Belyi map is defined on a curve of genus little g. All right, and the size of the passport is going to be a very important invariant. So the size of a passport is the number of permutation triples belonging to it up to simultaneous conjugacy. So as I mentioned, so simultaneous conjugacy is basically just reordering the sheets of a cover. So the size is basically telling us how many Belyi maps there are with given ramification type and given group and given genus that belong to this passport. And the size is going to give us a bound on the degree of the number fields, the field of definition of this Belyi map, which will be important in our computations later. Okay, so the next collection of objects that are important for us are triangle groups. So for a triple of integers a, b, and c that are at least 2, we define the triangle group delta ABC by the following presentation. So it's generated by these three symbols delta A, B, and C. And then the first three conditions state that delta A has order A, delta B order B, and delta C order C. And finally, that their product is the identity. So maybe a more geometric way to think about this triangle group is the following. So given these A, B, and C, we can draw a triangle with angles pi over A, pi over B, and pi over C. And that will live on either the sphere, the Euclidean plane, or in hyperbolic space. So here I've drawn a hyperbolic triangle in the hyperbolic upper half plane. Now, the triangle group you can understand as the orientation preserving symmetries of this triangle. So delta A you can think of as being a rotation about this vertex with angle pi over A by 2 pi over A, and delta B a rotation about this vertex with angle pi over B. So, okay, like I said, I gave you a precise definition with this presentation, but you can also think about it more geometrically. All right, and so the next character in our story is our dessin d'enfant. So this is something introduced in a previous talk. So a dessin d'enfant is a finite graph D embedded in an oriented, compact, connected topological surface X, satisfying the following three properties. So the graph must be connected. It must be bicolored, meaning that each vertex is assigned the color black or white, and adjacent vertices have different colors. So it's a bipartite graph that such that you've colored neighboring vertices opposite colors. And this last condition is maybe the most important topologically. So if you take the surface X and cut out the dessin, so remove the graph, what you're left with must be finely many connected components, each of which is homeomorphic to a disk. And these are called the faces of the dessin D. So this third condition is really putting conditions on with the surface, the genus of the surface that this dessin naturally lives on. All right, so here's our big bijective picture. So we have all our characters. I guess I left out this last one. So we have dessin with D edges. We have Belyi maps of degree D. We have index D triangle subgroups. So these are going to be subgroups of the triangle group that I defined before of index D. We have transitive permutation triples in SD. And for the function field enthusiasts, you can also think about degree function field extensions of the field of rational functions in one variable over C, with discriminants supported at 0, 1, and infinity. So as I mentioned, our method of computation is going to use this bijection. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to start with this more combinatorial data of transitive permutation triples. From that, we're going to form a triangle subgroup, which is going to allow us to compute a Belyi map. So that's the plan. So let me tell you how to navigate these bijections. So how do I get from one of these categories to another? So to go from Belyi maps to permutation triples is basically the monodrome representation, which I think was defined in a talk on the hyperbeat geometric differential equation earlier this fall. So let me review this briefly, just in case that's something that you don't remember. So let's let U be the preimage of P1 minus the 3.01 in infinity. And we're going to fix a base point P in P1 that is not one of these three special points. So basically what we've done is we've thrown out the three ramification values downstairs and thrown out the fibers above them upstairs in our surface X, our Riemann surface X. So since we've thrown out these ramification, the fibers above the ramification points, that means that if we restrict our map phi to this open set U, what we have is an honest covering space, so unramified, which allows us to apply, results in covering theory. All right, and also notice that so P1 minus 3 points is fundamental group generated by loops around 0, 1, and infinity, which I've drawn here in this picture below. So you can already see why it might make sense that we'll have three permutations since we have these three loops. All right, so how do we get the permutations? So by results in covering space theory, the fundamental group of the base of P1 minus 3 points acts on the D points in the fiber above our base point P by path lifting. So given a loop downstairs, it lifts to a path upstairs, but it's probably not a closed loop anymore. So you're traveling along this lifted loop, and you might end up somewhere else in the fiber. So this path lifting induces a homomorphism from the fundamental group of P1 minus 3 points to the symmetric group on D symbols, in this case, the D sheets of the cover. So this homomorphism is called the monodrome representation of the Belyi map phi, and its image is called the monodrome group. So this combinatorial data that we're getting from the monodrome representation corresponds to data about the Belyi map phi. So the cycles of the permutation correspond to the points of our curve x above 0, 1, and infinity, and the length of each cycle corresponds to its ramification index. So for instance, if you have a 3 cycle, that means that there's a point with ramification index 3 upstairs. So returning to this example that we did before. So here we can imagine, taking a loop around 0. And if we take the lift that starts on this red sheet, well, when we travel around, we're going to end up on this blue sheet. And if we take instead the lift of this loop that lands on this gray sheet, well, you stay on the gray sheet. So this is just to sort of illustrate how the path lifting works and how you get the permutations from this path lifting. Okay, so the answer for how you go from Belyi maps to permutation triples in a word is monodromy. All right, now let's go from permutation triples to triangle subgroups. So given a transitive permutation triple sigma, consisting of sigma 0, 1, and infinity, with respective orders A, B, and C that are at least 2, let delta be the associated triangle group subgroup, or the associated triangle group delta ABC. So then there's a group homomorphism from the triangle group delta to SD mapping delta A, B, and C, the generators of the triangle group, to sigma 0, 1, and infinity. And this is just because the sigma 0, 1, and infinity have to satisfy by being a transitive permutation triple the relations that define the presentation of this group delta. So that allows us to define the homomorphism in this way. So SD naturally acts on the numbers 1 through D, just as permutations do. And this homomorphism allows us to define an action of delta on 1 through D, and just by acting through its image in SD. So we're going to let gamma be a subgroup. It's going to be a subgroup of delta that's the stabilizer of the label 1. So we look at all permutations that stabilize 1 and then look at their preimages under this map pi. So it's the set of delta in our triangle group that stabilize 1, where here G is the subgroup of SD generated by our permutation triple sigma. So by the orbit stabilizer theorem, that means that the index of gamma in delta is D. Okay, so that's how we go from a permutation triple to a triangle subgroup. So again, in a word, stabilizer. Okay, and our final step is to go from triangle subgroups to Belyi maps. So let gamma be a subgroup of a triangle group delta. Then delta and gamma act on the associated geometric space H, where H is either the sphere, the Euclidean space, or hyperbolic space, depending on the values of A, B, and C. So remember, you can think about delta as these rotations around the vertices of your triangles. So you can take your geometric space, tessellate it with triangles, and then look at how the triangle group is acting on it by rotations. Okay, so the quotient space H mod delta is homeomorphic to a sphere, and after resolving quotient singularities, even isomorphic to P1 of C. So maybe you remember the picture that I drew in hyperbolic space. It was sort of this union of two triangles, and the sides will be identified. So you'll get this sort of triangular dumpling looking thing, but it has these 3 corners. But you can resolve those, blow them up, so you get a smooth curve, which is then isomorphic to P1 of C. So similarly, if you look at H mod gamma, this can also be given the structure of a smooth projective curve. And we have a natural map from H mod gamma to H mod delta that just takes an equivalence class modulo gamma to the corresponding equivalence class modulo delta. So, gamma is a subgroup of delta. So when you mod out by delta, you're modding out by something bigger. Okay, and I'll just note, so I'm writing, H mod gamma, but with gamma on the left, and that's because gamma is acting on the left, and similarly with delta. Okay, and so this this map will be our Belyi map, just this this further quotient by delta. So here's a picture illustrating this. So here on the right, we have a fundamental domain for the action of delta on the hyperbolic disk. So here, hopefully you can see. So I've labeled the sides. So this T1 and T1 are glued together. And this T2 and T2 are glued together. So like I said, you sort of imagine folding this over and getting a little dumpling thing. And similarly over here, we have a fundamental domain for the action of gamma on the hyperbolic disk. And again, we have these side pairings. So this edge is glued to this edge. You can imagine trying to fold this thing up into a little Riemann surface. So the map phi here, so that goes from h mod gamma to h mod delta. So it just takes, say I had a point right here in this, inside the fundamental domain. So all the map is going to do is, so you can see we have these translates labeled by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's just going to move this point into the corresponding point of the translate labeled 1. So just moves it over here, or precisely it moves it over here, right? And since this is a fundamental domain for the action of these groups, given any point in the disk, you can find a corresponding point inside here and then map it via how I just described by mapping it to the corresponding point in this triangle mirror pair labeled 1. Okay, so here's a summary of how we navigate these bijections and move between these categories. So to go from Belyi maps to permutation triples, we use the Monodrome Representation. To go from permutation triples to triangle subgroups, we take a stabilizer of the action of delta on 1 through D. And to go from triangle subgroups to Belyi maps, we look at the map between these two quotient spaces. So we have h mod gamma to h mod delta, where we just are sort of collapsing the action, the gamma equivalence classes to the delta equivalence classes. And I didn't mention these last two. I think this was mentioned in an earlier talk, how you get, given a Belyi map, how you get a dessin. You just look at the inverse image of the real interval from 0 to 1. And the white, well, I guess you have a choice to make, but usually I take the white dots to be those above the points above 0, and the black dots to be those above 1. And finally, for the function field fans in the room, so there's this sort of standard correspondence between rational maps between varieties, or between curves, I should say, and extensions of function fields. So if you have a rational map of curves, you get a corresponding extension of function fields, so the field of rational functions on the curves. So going back to our example in the beginning, so here's the Belyi map that we started with. So this cubic polynomial. And here's the corresponding dessin. So you can see this is a degree 3 map, and correspondingly there are 3 edges in the dessin. And so we saw there was one point above 0 of ramification index 2, and that's this point here, which has degree 2. And similarly above 1, there was one point of ramification index 2, which is this point here with this vertex here of degree 2. So if you go back and look at my picture of the cover and label the sheets 1, 2, 3, these are the 3 permutations that you get by taking, the monodrome action of this Belyi map. So you have, if we consider loops around 0, 1, and infinity, you can go from sheet 1 to sheet 2 by going around one of the loops around 0, and go from sheet 2 to sheet 3 by one of the loops around 1. And you can get between all 3 sheets by going around the loop around infinity. And so this is a degree 3 Belyi map, and correspondingly we get a triangle subgroup of index 3 in the triangle group delta 2, 2, 3. And lastly, the extension of function field. So if we call this polynomial t, then so the field of rational functions in t is contained in the field of rational functions in X, and this is an index 3 subfield. Okay, so now we've finished going through the various bijections and the big bijective picture. So if there are any questions, this is a good time to ask them.
No, we don't have any.
Okay, great. Well, I'll have a drink and then we'll keep going to computation. All right, so so Grothendieck had this great idea of studying the absolute Galois group by looking at Dessin. However, Deligny was a little bit more skeptical about this approach. So in one of his papers on the projective line minus 3 points, he said that Alexander Grothendieck and his students developed a combinatorial description of finite coverings of P1 minus 3 points. It has not helped in understanding the Galois action. We have only a few examples of non-solvable coverings whose Galois conjugates have been computed. So, he said this many belyi ago at this point. So our goal is to remedy this situation, to compute many examples of Belyi maps that are non-solvable, and so that we can really study this problem in a concrete way. So there are sort of three types of methods for computing Belyi maps, and in their survey paper, Seisling and Voigt discuss the various techniques that are used to compute them. So they fall into, as I said, there are roughly 3 categories. So the first is the direct method, which uses Grosvenor bases, which I'll mention in a moment. The second is p-adic methods, which was mentioned in the previous talk. So Elkies used this in one of his papers at ANTS 10, I think. And the method that we use sort of falls in this third category. So it's a complex analytic method. So let's take a look at the direct method. So suppose that we had this passport, so genus 0 Belyi map with monodromy group S3 with this ramification type. So 2, 1, 2, 1, 3. So suppose that we didn't know an equation for this map and we were just given this combinatorial data. So these 3 partitions in this monodromy group. So our goal is to compute an equation for this map. So first I'll note that since the cycles of length 2, 2, and 3, so 2, 2, and 3 are unique in their respective fibers above 0, 1, and infinity, that means we can apply an automorphism of P1 so that we can choose these points, these ramification points, to be 0, 1, and infinity again, without extending the field of definition. So it's important that these 3 be unique in their fibers. So for instance, if this fiber were 2 plus 2, then it wouldn't necessarily be the case that these points were defined over Q. But since this has a unique ramification index in its fiber, that means it must be fixed by the absolute Galois, the action of the absolute Galois group, which means that it's defined over Q. So that's why we're able to take this automorphism P1, this Mobius transformation, with entries in Q, so without extending the field of definition. Okay, so once we've made this normalization, picking this point to be 0, this one to be 1, and this one to be infinity, then we can assume that the Belyi map is a degree 3 polynomial of the following form. So it's so since the point of ramification index 2 is at 0, that means we have this double root at 0, this factor of x squared, and then we have x minus a for some a. And then similarly, if we take phi minus 1, or write it as phi equals 1 plus something, so this point, assuming that this point 2 with the ramification index 2 is 1, gives us this factor of x minus 1 squared. And again, then this 1 is some other point in Q bar. So we get this factorization of phi for these 3 as of yet undetermined coefficients a, b, and c, which we can take to be algebraic numbers. So okay, we have these 2 expressions for phi, so we can expand and equate coefficients. And if we do that, we get an equation, a system of 3 polynomial equations and 3 unknowns. And okay, this system is not too hard to solve, and it has a unique solution: a equals 3 halves, b equals minus 1 half, and c equals minus 2. And this gives us, Okay, it's a slightly different equation than the one we had in the beginning, but just by a minus sign. So this was the direct method. So we write down sort of a factorization of what the Belyi map has to look like using its ramification data above 0 and 1. This gives us a system of polynomial equations, which we then have to solve. So in general, you can try to solve this resulting system of polynomial equations using Grosvenor bases, but as the degrees get higher and higher, you're going to get more and more variables and more equations. And in the worst case, Grosvenor bases Grosvenor basis algorithms usually run in doubly exponential time. So this can be very slow and it can take up a lot of space. Okay, so so this is a paper I wrote with Mike Klug, Mike Musty, S is me, and John Voigt in 2014, presenting a numerical method to compute Belyi maps. So here's a rough outline of how our numerical method works. So we start off with a permutation triple sigma, and we get as output equations for the corresponding curve x and Belyi map phi with monodrome group monodrome group given by this sigma. So as I mentioned, we start off with this combinatorial data, which is kind of easier to compute in an exhaustive way. You can list all the permutations of degree d. And we get from it equations for the curve and map. So here are the steps. So as we discussed in our big bijective picture navigation, so given a permutation triple sigma, we can form the associated triangle subgroup gamma, and we can compute what's called this coset graph. So basically, you look at the cosets of gamma inside delta and look at the action of delta on this. And so that gives you, you can say, oh, I can get from this coset to get this coset by applying delta A or delta B, etc. So this gives us a graph of whose vertices are the cosets of delta mod gamma and whose edges are labeled by either delta A or delta B or their inverses. So next, we're going to compute modular forms for this triangle subgroup gamma. So we're going to use a reduction algorithm for gamma and numerical linear algebra to compute numerical power series expansions of modular forms of an appropriate weight k. So this is based on work of John Voigt and John Willis, and also Michael Klug. And the basic idea is, so you write down a Taylor series expansion with undetermined coefficients, and then you take 2 points in the disk that you know are related by an element of gamma. And then since you have a modular form, well, then you know how it transforms under gamma. So this gives you, you have this factor of automorphy that pops out. So this gives you a linear equation in the coefficients of the power series expansion for the modular form, which if you use enough points, you can then solve. Oh yeah, so I should just mention, so in the classical case where you're dealing with a subgroup of SL2Z, so the modular group, there you have cusps, and so you can use Q expansions. Unfortunately for us, or maybe fortunately, I guess it depends on your perspective. So we're taking A, B, and C to be finite. So that means that the triangle group has no cusps, and neither does the triangle subgroup. So you don't have Fourier series or Q expansions, but you can instead use Taylor series expansions, which work almost as well. Oh, and as I'll just emphasize here again, so everything is numerical in this step. So we're really dealing with floating point numbers. So we start out with sort of exact data with these combinatorial, these permutations, and we're going to end with exact data too, but we're going to pass through these numerical steps in the middle. Okay, so once we have these numerical power series for the modular forms of our triangle subgroup gamma, we're going to use them to embed the curve into projective space. So we use numerical linear algebra and Riemann-Roch to find polynomial relations among the series Fi, which yield equations for the curve x and the map phi. So basically, it depends a little bit on the genus of the curve, but you form some set of monomials of these series for these series for your modular forms Fi, because you're using these Fi to embed your curves. They're basically going to be the variables of your projective space Pn. And then you look for a linear relation among the monomials, which gives you a polynomial relation among the series, which are going to give you equations for the curve and for the map. All right, and finally, so these two steps are both numerical, right? Numerical linear algebra, numerical linear algebra. So now we're trying to get exact equations back. So we normalize the equations of x and phi so that the coefficients are algebraic, and then we recognize these coefficients as elements of some number field k over C. So I guess in the beginning, I said that things could be defined over Q bar, but a curve is defined by finitely many equations with finitely many variables, so it must lie in some finite extension of Q, some number field k. Okay, so after this step, we've recovered exact equations. So we've written down algebraic numbers, who's defining this curve and this map. But we had this sort of these numerical steps where maybe we didn't keep track of the errors so carefully. So our last step is to verify that the map that we computed is actually correct. So we can compute that the map has correct ramification just using Magma. And there's a SAGE package by Nils Brown, Jeroen Sijsling, and Alexandra Zotin that allows you to, using homotopy continuation, to compute the monodrome representation of a morphism of Riemann surfaces. Oh, and I should have mentioned, so in this step where we recognize these coefficients, so this uses the LLL lattice reduction algorithm. Basically, you're thinking about the geometry of numbers and thinking about your the ring of integers of k as being a lattice in some space. Okay, so this is an outline of our numerical method. So I think I'm gonna, so let me state the one improvement using Newton, and then I'll give you a demo of our code in Magma. So we can combine the direct method and our numerical method. So I think Hartmut mentioned this in his talk as well. So you can use Newton's method to really get great gains in precision. So we combine the direct method and our method as follows. So we first compute a moderate precision numerical approximation to the Belyi map and the curve using our numerical method. Now, the problem with the Grosvenor basis method is that you sort of didn't have a starting point, but since we can use our numerical method to get a starting point, well, we can then use this as an initial approximate solution to a system of polynomial equations that the coefficients of the map and the curve must satisfy. So the system that we wrote down from the direct method. And since we have a starting point and a system of equations, we can then apply Newton iteration to gain massive gains in precision. So so for instance, consider the passport. So it's a Genus2 passport with monodrome group S8 with this ramification type. And you can compute that this passport has size 28. And it turns out that it consists of just one Galois orbit. So that means that you have some equation defined over a degree 28 number field, that's pretty big, right? So you're going to need a lot of precision in order to recognize these complex, these floating point complex numbers as algebraic numbers. So using Newton iteration, we're able to compute to 26,000 digits of precision, and then able to recognize the coefficients of the corresponding Belyi map as elements of a degree 28 number field. So I'm not going to do that example in Magma because it would take too long. But here's a brief example. So this code is available on GitHub at this link here. So here, maybe I'll click on it. Oops. Maybe I'll get out of full screen mode too. All right, so here's the GitHub link. If you want to get the code, you can just clone it here. And if you want to actually do some development, you can fork it using the link up here. So here, let's take a look at an example. So here I'm in my oh, maybe I need to change my sharing, I think. Can you see my screen? Yes? Okay. So here I'm in my GitHub directory. And here you can see the various files that we use to that have the code to compute the Belyi maps. So I'm going to go into Magma. So there's this spec file, which is the specification file that allows us to load all these different functions. Oops, attach spec. Okay, and so now I have all our triangle functions and all our Belyi functions. All right, so here's a permutation triple that I downloaded from the LMFDB that we computed. So let's take the first of these sigmas. So here's our permutation triple sigma. And yeah, so I want it to print out lots of stuff so that we can see what's going on. So I'm going to set verbose to be true. All right, and now let's give it a try. So I'm just running this on my laptop. It's not, anything very powerful. Oh, maybe I'll make the triangle subgroup first. Okay, so let's okay, so we'll compute the Belyi map of gamma, and let's do precision, let's say 40. Okay, so all right, it's going to print out a bunch of stuff, and then we'll go through and talk about what's happening in these different steps. But basically right now it's computing the power series for the modular forms. So it's doing this numerical linear algebra using some numerical method called Arnaldi iteration. Okay, so the error is getting smaller and smaller up to 10 to the minus 34. Okay, and now a bunch of stuff's going to fly by. Okay, now we're in the Newton iteration. Okay, and so it took 30 seconds and we have our Belyi map. So here's our curve and here's our map. The map is going to be a little bit hideous, but it's there. So let's just go through a little bit more slowly the steps of this computation. So, okay, like I said, in this part, it's computing numerical power series for the modular forms. Once we have these, so it turns out this is a genus1 Belyi map. Oh yeah, here it's let's see, computing. Oh yeah, so what it's doing now is, so this is a genus1 Belyi map. So what you do is you write down a power series for the holomorphic differential and then integrate to get the period lattice. So here it's it's integrating around these various side pairings, and here are the periods that it finds. Okay, now we reduce down to 2 periods, which are, so the period lattice is generated by these 2 complex numbers. All right, and now we write down the numerical approximation for the Belyi map and curve. All right, so here is where Newton comes into play. So we're going to write down a system of equations in these variables. So the C4 and C6, these are the invariance of the elliptic curve. These x's and y's are coordinates of the points above 0, 1, and infinity. So white, black, and C is for cross for the points above infinity. And then these last things, the A's and the B's are coefficients of the Belyi map. So we write down some big system of polynomial equations in these variables. And now we're going to apply Newton iteration. So let's see. So we start out. Okay, so we start out and we plug in our initial approximation to the system of equations, and we get an error of about 10 to the minus 9, which is not very good, right? It's 10 to the minus 9 is not going to be enough to recognize, probably not to recognize these algebraic numbers. But you can see once we do another, so each time we're doing a Newton iteration, we're gaining a lot of precision. So now there is 10 to the minus 19, 10 to the minus 40, and so on and so forth until we get, let's see, 10 to the minus about 1600. Okay, so lots and lots of precision. I probably could have gotten away with less if I wanted to. Okay, and so now we have very good approximations for these complex numbers, which we think are algebraic numbers. So now we try to recognize them with LLL. So we recognize one of the coefficients. It turns out that it's defined over a degree 8 number field with this, and these are the ramified primes. So here's the number field we start with. there's a Paris command called polredabs, which will give you a nicer polynomial defining your number field. So here's the degree 8, the polynomial defining the degree 8 number field. Okay, now it looks at the rest of the coefficients and tries to recognize them over this number field. Okay, this one, I think we can recognize this one. 1.00000, 10 to the minus 3,000 times I. Okay, I think we got that one. But the other ones are not so obvious, right? So here's some floating point number, right? But it turns out that so k.1 is the generator for the number field. So here's how you express it in terms of the generator for this number field k. And similarly, you can do this with all the rest of the coefficients. Okay, so we get in the end a curve, an elliptic curve, and a Belyi map. But we still need to verify that this is the right thing, because I gave you, look at this enormous thing. How can we tell that it's right? Well, if I look at the divisor of phi, okay, so it factors, it has a 0 of order 7 at this point, and a simple 0 here, and then poles like this. So if we compare this to the permutation triple that we started with, okay, so we're supposed to have a 7 cycle above 0 and a 1 cycle above, and also a 1 cycle above 0. So we have that. Then we're supposed to have 2 3 cycles and 2 1 cycles. This looks a little funny because it looks like we only have one of each, but Magma writes this $.1 is basically an unnamed variable, and it lives inside some quadratic field. So really we have, you have one, if you split up these points, if you base change to this quadratic field, this will split up into two points each of ramification index 3 and 2 points each of ramification index 1. Okay, so above 0, it looks good. Now above 1, it also looks good. So we're supposed to have a 6 cycle and a 2 cycle, and indeed we have a 6 and a 2 as these are the ramification indices at these points. Okay, so hopefully this gives you some confidence that this is the right map. I'm not going to do the homotopy continuation thing because I don't want to have to open up Sage, but it would be a remarkable coincidence if this was not right, right? And we can also look at, for instance, the J invariance of our elliptic curve X and take the norm of it. Okay, and let's factor this. So you can see it has mostly small primes. Maybe the discriminant would be a better thing to do. Oh yeah, I should say $1 is just means do the previous output. So let's factor this. Okay, so 2 to the 104 and 7 to the 66. Okay, I couldn't have picked this curve if I'd tried, right? This is it's pretty special that it's only ramified in these places, right? Or sorry, it only has bad reduction at these places. Okay, so that's the demo of our computation code. So let's go back to my slides and talk about the data. Okay, so there was an original database of Belyi maps made by Betrema, Perret, and Zvonkin in the 90s, where they just they created a catalog of dessin that were plane trees with at most 8 edges, and they computed the corresponding Belyi maps. And you can see the database, their database online at this link. So this was sort of inspiration for us. Oh yeah, so here's an example. So here's all the plane trees with 5 edges and the corresponding Belyi maps. But so insisting that you have something that's planar, meaning genus 0, and also a tree, meaning has a point where it's totally ramified, is kind of a strong restriction. So we'd like to do a more general Belyi maps database. So in 2018,
let me be clear about terminology. Your plane trees are really actually the same, right?
Yes. They're dessins that happen to be planar, that are graphs that are planar and are trees. Exactly.
So there will be a lot of the corresponding groups will have a lot of torsion.
Corresponding groups. Yeah, I guess, yeah, right. These rotations certainly will. Is that what you mean? They'll have torsion?
The genus 0 groups. Okay. All right.
Yes, but that's a good point. These are the dessins. And so they've written down all the dessins that are planar trees with 5 edges. Okay, so our database is, okay, so one place that you can get it is again on GitHub. So again, here's the GitHub page. If you want to clone it, you can just click right here and clone it. It's kind of big. I think it's about a little under 2 gigabytes. So it's a lot of data. If you don't want to download it, that's fine. We have it on the web, so you can view it there instead. So instead, maybe maybe you just want to look at it, look at the data in your browser, and now you can do that on the LMFDB's website. So let me just highlight some features of our database, and then I'll show you online what it looks like. So there are many maps. So we have over 1,000 Galois orbits of Belyi maps that lie in over 1,000 passports. And I'd like to thank Edgar Costa for helping me uploading this data. So you can search if you want to find all the Belyi maps that have, Genus1 or have a certain group as its monodromy group. You can do that. We have a collection of statistics, so you can see, what percentage of the passports have at least 2 orbits or something. You can go online and see this. The really great thing about the LMFDB is that it shows you the relationship between various types of objects. So, maybe the most famous one is the modularity theorem. So if you have a modular form, there's a link to the corresponding isogeny class of elliptic curves. So you can just click on that link. And similarly, when we have a Belyi map, if it's defined on a curve that's in the LMFDB, I've gone through and found it using a script and linked it to on the Belyi map page. You can also download the Belyi maps, so you can download code to Magma or Sage. There are pictures of the fundamental domains, which we call portraits. And this past spring, I did some work with as a part of a reading course with some MIT undergrads, so Alexandra Hoey, Katie Gravel, and Ian Lamarta. And we computed what we call primitivizations of Belyi maps, basically ones that factor and have an intermediate cover below. So enough talking. Let's do a quick demo of Bellydb and then of the LMFDB. So here's Bellydb. So I'm in my GitHub directory, and we have a config file. So now, once I've loaded the config file, I have all my Belyi functions that we defined. So so we have Bellydb file names. We'll give you all the names for each degree. So here's the names of degree 7. Okay, and we're going to take a very special name. So the 57th, the Grothendieck prime. And so now we have our name, and now we can load. So Bellydb read. And this gives us a Bellydb object. So it tells you various things about the passport. So it has, the passport is of size 8, and it consists of 3 Galois orbits. So for instance, if I look at Bellydb curves, or Belyi curves, I should say, here are the curves. So it's a Genus2 passport, so it gives you a bunch of Genus2 curves. So for instance, so we call this curves. So curves 1 is defined over this degree 5 number field. Curves 3 defined over this quadratic number field, and curves 5 is defined over curves 8. So here you can really see the 3 different orbits that you get in this passport. And similarly, you can look at the maps. There's lots of different things that you can look at from this. Yeah. Here are all the different attributes that this object has. So again, if you really want to get your hands dirty with the data, you can go to GitHub and download and clone this repository. But if you just want to look at the data in maybe a more digestible way, let's go to the LMFDB. Okay, so if you haven't seen the LMFDB before, I highly encourage you to poke around. There's a random object button, so you can just see a random object in the database. Let's see what we get today. Get an L function, great. If you have something that you're more specifically that you're interested in on the left-hand side, there are different categories of things. You'll notice that Belyi maps aren't showing up here. That's because we need to go to the underground LMFDB website, the beta site. So the Belyi maps collection is still in progress. Hopefully we'll be getting onto the main site relatively soon. So here's our landing page for Belyi maps. So you can see there are lots of different things you can search on. And you can look at statistics. So for instance, like I said, if you want to know how are the degrees distributed in our database. So we've computed an exhaustive database up to degree 6, and then mostly complete in degrees 7, 8, and 9. So you can see that most of the maps have degree 9. You can look at the distribution of the genus. The majority of them have genus 0, but there are still quite a few of genus 1. And maybe the most interesting thing is the number of Galois orbits per passport. So you can see that the vast majority are irreducible as Galois sets, but there are some that have multiple Galois orbits. So I think I pulled up some interesting ones so that we can demo in the last couple minutes. So I think this is the one that I computed. Yeah, this is the one I computed a minute ago. So it's a genus 1 Belyi map defined over this degree 8 number field. So in the related object, you can go look at the passport if you want. Here, there's only one orbit, so it's not so exciting. Oh yeah, and so if you want to download the map, the link is over here on the right-hand side. Here is the second one that I showed you in the Bellydb demo. So here's a Genus2 map of degree 7. So this is the one that's defined over Q. Oh yeah, and if we go to its passport, oh no, this is a different one, isn't it? Yeah, okay. So here's another map that you might find interesting. So here's a genus 1 map defined of degree 7 defined over a field of degree 12. And here, the passport has 3 orbits. So you get this one orbit defined over this quadratic field, another defined over this degree 8 field, and finally one defined over this degree 12 field. And so you can see there are links to all these number fields, or most of the number fields. This one's too big to be in the LMFDB, but you can also go to the home pages for these number fields, because maybe these are interesting. All right, here's one where the curve, so it's a genus 1 map of degree 8, and here's one where the curve is in the LMFDB. So if you want to know more about this elliptic curve, you can click on this link, and you'll be directed to this this page from the Cremona database of elliptic curves. And similarly, do I have a Genus2 one? Oh yeah, so here's another one that's in the Cremona database. And oh yeah, here's one that's in the database of elliptic curves defined over number fields. So this one's defined over Q adjoin I. And finally, here's a Genus2 map of a degree 6, and here's the link to the corresponding page in the Genus2 curve database on the LMFDB. So you can look up the conductor, the Agusa-Klebschen variance, and all things like that. Okay, so I think I'm just about out of time, so I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
So let us thanks to the.
Yeah, very clear, very clear.
So is there any questions?
Yeah, let me just ask you, suppose you take a subgroup of finite index in the full modular group. So at the Belyi map, the ramification is only of type 2 and 3. Okay, the ramification indices.
Okay.
Further assume that it is of genus 0. The curve is of genus 0. Can you just write down the equations?
I think it's a little bit tricky. So most of what because if it's a subgroup of the modular group, that's a 2, 3 infinity triangle, right?
2, 3 infinity,
so,
yes.
Yeah. So
now you see the full modular group is just y squared equals x cubed.
y squared equals x.
X cubed is just the cusp.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah, I think
similarly, I
it's,
think if you have, if you just have the genus 0 groups, that should be easy to write down the equations.
okay. Yeah, I have, like I
Actual algebraic equations, whose, when you normalize them, you get a genus 0 curve.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I hadn't thought too much about it, triangle groups where one of the angles is 0, where you have an infinity. But I think it should still be okay. But then you have cusps, so you can. I think maybe you don't need to use our method then, because when you have cusps, you have Q expansions, right? And so then you don't need to use a numerical method. You can just use, because you can write down a Q expansion, no?
I think the problem seems easy to me to start with, and so maybe whatever your method, with your method which is applies to many things, in particular for these curves, you can just write down equations. That would be of interest, of some interest.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think you could definitely use parts of our method, especially like you could write down Q expansions and then try to use try to use exact linear algebra even to write them down. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting class of Belyi maps to try to compute. Yes, I agree.
And one can explain to the undergraduates and graduates there's a direct relationship of the groups and the curves.
Yeah.
So I have a small question. So I saw that you are using a triple L algorithm in order to find the integer relations. So there is a PSLQ algorithm also. Which one is more efficient? I heard that PSLQ is better than triple L. So I wanted to confirm that one.
Oh, I hadn't heard of this. Sorry, what it's called
PSLQ. It is already there implemented in Sage.
Oh, okay, I'll have to try it out. No, I hadn't used that one yet.
So this is actually there in Sage, and it is written by David H. Belyi and J.M. Borwein have a PSLQ and algorithm to discover integer relations. 14th May 2020, there is an article.
Oh, nice. Well, thank you very much for pointing that out. I'll have to take a look at this article. We're using LLL, but I haven't tried this other method now.
I heard that this is more efficient than, I personally used this PSLQ algorithm, and it is more efficient, in fact.
I see. So you don't need as high precision to find the relations, or?
High precision is required, but there are advantages. I really don't know the technical details, but it is clearly explained in that Bailey's and Bradley's article.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for suggesting that.
Okay. Is there any other question?
I'm just commenting that you may consider writing an article on this thing for people.
Yes, yes.
Triangle group. What is the triangle group and whatever you want to say about it?
And
the Mathematics Consortium has a bulletin of the Mathematics Consortium. So if you would like to do that, then we will invite you to write this article, expository article for the students and those who are interested in this thing. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think an expository article on triangle groups, yeah, could be very nice.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
very good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sam. See you sometime again in the program.